No one noticed the janitor until they needed a mess cleaned. That was the quiet truth of Carl's life at Westwell Ashby, a high-end marketing firm nestled in downtown Chicago's glass towers. Every morning he arrived before sunrise, mopped down floors that no one thanked him for, and disappeared by the time the execs ordered their second lattes. Carl didn't mind. Not out loud. He was 62. Had raised 3 kids. Lost one. Kept his dignity folded neatly into his pocket like the old grocery list he used to carry when his wife was still alive. But that Monday was different. Because as he sat alone in the break room, unwrapping a ham sandwich from wax paper, a voice rang out behind him. "Yo, check it out, Baloney Bob brought a lunch from 1963. The laughter that followed was sharp. Loud enough for the entire floor to hear. Carl didn't look up. He didn't flinch. But his hands paused over the sandwich. Across the room, tucked into a booth near the window, a man in a black hoodie lifted his eyes from a laptop. He'd been there all morning. No badge. No nameplate. Just quiet, observant calm. He watched. Not the joke. The damage. And in that moment, everything began to shift. The laughter kept echoing, even as it died down. The culprit was a junior associate named Ryan, a fast-talking, cologne-heavy guy with a buzz cut and a Rolex that never shut up. Fresh out of business school and drunk on the illusion of status, he strutted past Carl like he owned the floor, high-fiving a colleague on the way to the espresso machine. "Dude," one whispered, barely suppressing a grin. "That was brutal." "Come on," Ryan replied, smug. "Guy smells like floor cleaner and sadness. If I can't joke, what's the point of surviving college debt?" They both laughed again. Carl quietly folded his sandwich back into the wax paper. He'd eaten here for 3 years, always in the same seat, always at the same time. It was his routine, his rhythm. The only thing in this building that was his. But today, it had been taken. He stood up. His chair creaked. No one stopped him. Except one. From the booth by the window, the man in the hoodie closed his laptop, slowly, deliberately, and stood. He was tall. His presence was weight without force. His steps made no sound on the polished floor. And as he approached the break room door, his voice came low and steady. "Excuse me," he said, not to Carl, but to Ryan. "Mind if I ask you something?" Ryan blinked, caught off guard. Yeah? What?" The man tilted his head slightly. "What do you think that joke cost you?" Ryan stared at the man like he'd misheard. "What?" The question had landed too softly to seem like a threat. But there was something about the way the man said it. "What did it cost you?" That unnerved him. "I don't get it," Ryan said, letting out a half laugh. "It was a joke. You know, office humor? Lighten up." The man's eyes didn't blink. He wasn't angry. He wasn't amused either. "Humor's not harmless if it punches down," he said. He laughed. The room laughed. But he didn't. Ryan rolled his eyes, glancing toward Carl, who had paused by the exit. He was watching now, quiet, still, unreadable. "Look, I don't even know who you are, man," Ryan said, folding his arms. "This is an internal company space." The man didn't move. His voice remained even. "I know." Ryan waited. But no introduction came. The silence thickened. Finally, someone near the fridge cleared their throat and muttered, Is that Keanu Reeves?" A ripple passed through the room. Whispers. Glances. A phone tilted up, but one look from the man in the hoodie, and it lowered again. Ryan frowned. "Wait, are you joking?" Keanu gave a slow blink. "No." And then he turned to Carl. "Would you join me for lunch?" The break room, once a hive of shallow laughter and clinking cups, fell into an eerie stillness. Carl blinked, uncertain. "Me?" Keanu nodded. "If you don't mind." For a moment, the entire office floor felt like it was holding its breath. Carl glanced down at his sandwich, still half-wrapped, a little soggy now. Then up at the man who, 5 seconds ago, had simply been another quiet presence. Now, he was the one everyone watched. Carl hesitated, then shrugged lightly, the ghost of a smile playing at the corner of his mouth. "Sure," he said. They walked together toward the booth by the window. Carl's steps were slow, deliberate. He didn't rush. Keanu didn't either. They sat. Carl placed his wax paper sandwich on the table. Keanu reached into a plain brown bag, no label, no fanfare, and pulled out a homemade salad in a glass container. Lentils, greens, olive oil. Nothing glamorous. Just real. He placed it down and looked at Carl, eyes warm but sharp. "I've had meals at 5-star restaurants," he said. "But none of them ever came close to the ones I shared with people who had something real to say." Carl chuckled, dry and low. "Well, I'm not much of a philosopher." Keanu smiled. "Good. Philosophers talk too much. I prefer listeners." From across the break room, Ryan stood frozen, jaw tense, a tremor of something unfamiliar creeping across his expression. Regret? Embarrassment? No one laughed now. No one dared. 10 minutes passed. Maybe 15. Carl and Keanu sat and ate like old friends, though they'd only just met. No dramatic speeches. No grand reveals. Just quiet conversation between two men who knew what it meant to be invisible in different ways. Carl talked about how he used to coach high school basketball before the school downsized. About his late wife, Teresa, who used to pack his lunches just like this one. About the way people stopped seeing you once you traded a tie for a jumpsuit. Keanu didn't interrupt. He just listened, really listened, the kind of listening people forget how to do in a world addicted to its own voice. Across the room, the other employees tried to act natural. Tried not to stare. Some failed. A few stole glances between emails. One woman put down her phone mid-scroll, guilt curling in her chest. Another man nudged his sandwich aside, appetite gone. Ryan paced near the vending machine, arms crossed tight, phone clenched but unused. He'd gone viral before, once on TikTok for doing the worm at a party, but this wasn't the kind of attention he wanted. Because this wasn't a meme. This was a moment. And he was the punchline. Meanwhile, Keanu leaned forward, elbows on the table, and asked Carl a question no one had thought to ask in years. "What do you want to do next?" Carl paused, stunned. No one had ever asked him that. Not since before the world moved on without him. He looked down at his hands, calloused, tired, honest. Then he looked up. "I think," he said slowly, "I'd like to be seen." By mid-afternoon, word had spread. No memo had gone out, no formal announcement made. But every cubicle buzzed with murmurs. The guy from The Matrix. The actor. The one who rode the subway and bought breakfast for strangers. Now he was having lunch with the janitor. Not the CEO. Not the department head. The janitor. People peeked from behind their monitors. Some whispered. Some watched in guilty silence. In the marketing wing, a junior copywriter named Elise stared down at her untouched salad, her thoughts tangled. She'd never spoken to Carl. Not once. But she remembered how he always wiped the breakroom fridge handle twice, every morning. She remembered how he nodded at her when she forgot her umbrella last Tuesday. And now, sitting across from Keanu Reeves, he looked like the most dignified man in the building. Meanwhile, in HR, Diane, the floor manager, pulled up Carl's employee record. Punctual. Never once late. She scrolled through old notes. Nothing disciplinary, nothing remarkable. That was the problem. He'd been easy to overlook because he'd never asked to be seen. She stared at the screen. Then she opened a new window and began typing an email to facilities. Across the hall, Ryan sat stiffly in his chair, trying to focus on quarterly projections. But the numbers blurred, smudged by his own rising shame. He'd thought himself clever. He'd thought the joke would make him look cool. But now he just felt small. From his window seat, Keanu stood up. Carl followed. They didn't say goodbye to the break room. They didn't need to. Because the lesson had already been delivered. Not loudly. Just clearly. As they stepped into the hallway, the energy shifted. Keanu didn't walk like someone famous. He walked like someone certain. And Carl, just a step behind, carried himself taller now, not because the eyes were on him, but because someone had finally looked. They passed cubicles, coffee machines, and glazed stares that flickered with something close to reflection. One young man, an intern no older than 20, stood up as they passed and gave Carl a quiet nod. Respectful. Sincere. Carl returned it. On the way to the elevator, Keanu paused at the glass display case near the lobby, a wall of photos, highlighting the firm's top talent. All smiling. All polished. All corporate. Not a single janitor among them. He studied it for a moment. Then turned to Carl. Ever wonder how many people it takes to keep this place running? Carl shrugged. Just the ones no one notices. Keanu smiled faintly. Maybe they should start. The elevator dinged. They stepped in. Just as the doors began to close, a voice called out, urgent, uncertain. Wait! It was Elise, the copywriter. She rushed toward them, breathless, holding something in her hands. A folded sheet of paper. The doors opened again. She began, her voice shaky. I thought maybe you could have this. It's nothing big. Just something. Carl took the paper. Unfolded it. Inside was a hand-drawn flyer mock-up. At the top, faces of Westwell, the people who keep us going. Below it, an empty frame with the words, coming soon, Carl. Carl stared. No words. Just something catching in his throat. And for the first time since Teresa's funeral, he felt tears threaten the surface. Keanu placed a gentle hand on his shoulder, and they rode the elevator down in silence. The elevator opened into the lobby, quiet except for the occasional footsteps of delivery couriers and a hum from the reception desk. Carl stepped out first, the flyer still in his hand. He folded it carefully and slid it into his chest pocket like it was a check made out to his worth. Keanu followed, nodding once to the security guard by the door, who, up until this moment, hadn't realized who the man in the hoodie was. The guard stiffened slightly, mouth half open, but Keanu just offered a warm smile. No autographs. No selfies. Just acknowledgement. Just human. They walked side by side to the street. The sky had cleared, revealing that bright, too blue Chicago afternoon glow. Taxis passed. A food truck beeped as it backed into a loading zone. The city moved on. But something had changed. Not out there. In there. Carl turned to Keanu, his voice low. I don't know what made you speak up. But thank you. Keanu looked him in the eye. You did. Carl tilted his head. What do you mean? You were quiet. You were kind. You didn't fight back to be right. You just held your ground without losing yourself. He paused. That's rare. Carl chuckled. Yeah, well, some people think I'm just a guy with a mop. Keanu's reply came with a knowing nod. That's because they've never needed one. They stood there a moment longer, the kind of pause that only happens between men who recognize something unspoken in each other. Then Carl said, You're not what I expected. Keanu smirked. No one ever is. That's the whole point. He turned, gave a small wave, and disappeared into the crowd like smoke. No cameras. No entourage. Just footsteps heading nowhere important after having changed everything. By the time Carl made it home, the city had shifted back into its usual rhythm, car horns, rustling newspapers, distant sirens. But something inside him refused to settle. He unlocked his small apartment, tucked above a laundromat, and hung his jacket on the old peg by the door. His lunchbox sat heavy in his hand, but his mind was still at Westwell. Still in that break room. Still at that table. He opened the fridge, half empty, pulled out a beer, and sat at the kitchen table. On instinct, he unfolded the flyer Elise had given him and set it down in front of him. His name. In print. Not a complaint form. Not a schedule. Just recognition. His eyes stung. He hadn't been on a wall since high school. Back then, it had been for most reliable player on the basketball team. He hadn't thought about that photo in decades. Carl ran a hand over his beard and let the silence stretch. Then he reached for his old tablet. The thing took nearly a minute to boot up. When it did, he opened a blank email and began typing. Subject: an idea for the company newsletter. He wrote slowly, thoughtfully. Suggested a monthly feature highlighting support staff, cleaners, cafeteria workers, tech crew. He included 3 names, just to start. Not his own. Before sending, he paused. Then added one final line. Sometimes, the quietest people are holding the place together. He hit send. And for the first time in a long while, He leaned back, not feeling small, but essential. Back at Westwell Ashby, the next morning began like most others. Coffee carts in the lobby, high heels clicking against marble, elevator doors opening and closing like the beats of a metronome. But subtle things had shifted. At the receptionist's desk, a bowl of wrapped candies had been placed, Carl's favorite kind. No note. Just there. Near the break room, a new bulletin board had appeared overnight. Titled Unsung Heroes, it had room for photos, stories, and names yet to be added. A single sheet of paper hung in the center. Carl's. Printed, framed, and pinned beneath a heading that read, "More than a mop. Meet the man who cleans, cares, and quietly inspires." Employees paused. Read it. Some smiled. Some didn't know what to feel. Others just stared, shame flickering in their eyes as they remembered yesterday's laughter. Ryan did too. He had barely slept. The moment with Keanu had replayed in his mind all night. Not just the embarrassment, but the truth beneath it. He saw himself clearly now, and it made his stomach twist. At 10:03 a.m. he did something rare. He left his desk, walked to the janitor's closet, and knocked. Carl opened it, surprised. Ryan cleared his throat. "Hey. I wanted to say something." Carl said nothing. Just waited. Ryan's hands fidgeted. "What I said yesterday. It was cheap. And wrong. And I'm sorry." Carl raised an eyebrow. "You sure that's not just guilt talking?" Ryan cracked a sheepish smile. "A little. But also respect. The real kind." Carl nodded once. "Takes guts to say it. Thanks." Then, after a beat, "You still owe me a sandwich." Ryan laughed nervously. "Deal." And somewhere, high above the city streets, a ripple of decency began moving outward, soft, slow, and strong. Later that week, Westwell's internal newsletter went out as usual, subject line dull, design uninspired. But the first article was different. No sales figures. No promotions. Just a story. "The Floor Beneath Our Feet," it was titled. It began with a quote. "We're not all meant to be seen, but some people deserve it anyway." It told Carl's story, where he'd come from, how he showed up every day, what he meant to the building and the people in it. It mentioned the moment in the break room, though not by name, and how a stranger's voice had made silence impossible to ignore. By noon, the article had been shared across departments. By 2 o'clock, HR had added Employee Spotlight to its monthly strategy. By 4 o'clock, someone posted the photo board on the company's LinkedIn page. Within an hour, the post had gone viral. Keanu Reeves wasn't tagged. He wouldn't have wanted to be. But people knew. Or at least they guessed. Screenshots circled. Captions read things like, "Imagine a world where more people stepped in like this." Carl didn't read the comments. He didn't need the world's validation. But when he returned to the break room and found a reserved plaque on his favorite table, Carl's Corner, etched in clean silver, he sat down and opened his wax paper lunch with a smile. Across the country, in a small, nondescript coffee shop in LA, Keanu scrolled past the article on his phone. He read it once. Then locked the screen. And sipped his coffee in peace. Friday evening arrived with a slow hush settling over the office. Most of the staff had gone home. Desks were empty, chairs tucked in, the hum of fluorescent lights softened by the fading sunset. Carl stayed late. Not because he had to, but because he wanted to. Some habits you don't shake. You retire them with purpose. He polished the glass doors of the front lobby one last time, then turned to face the empty floor. The building felt different now. Not just cleaner, but lighter. As he gathered his things, a voice echoed gently behind him. "Hey, Carl." It was Elise, the copywriter who'd started it all with one sketch on a page. She held a folder in her hand. "What's that?" Carl asked. She smiled. "The first draft of your monthly column." Carl blinked. "My what?" "Janet in HR thought you should write a piece each month. Reflections, observations, stories from the ground level. They're calling it Carl's Corner." Carl laughed, low and warm. "That's unexpected." Elise smiled. "So was everything else this week." He took the folder. Opened it. Inside was a blank page. Waiting for his voice. She left him there with it. Alone in the lobby, Carl sat down near the glass doors. Pen in hand. Shoes aching just a little. He thought of Teresa. Of his kids. Of every time he thought no one saw him. And then he began to write. Not because he wanted attention, but because somewhere, someone like him was still being laughed at. And they needed to know. Their story mattered. Sometimes the strongest voice is the one that doesn't raise itself. Keanu didn't need to humiliate anyone. He didn't call for justice. He simply showed it, with grace, humility, and strength. Carl didn't ask to be seen. But someone chose to see him anyway. So the next time you find yourself in a room where someone's dignity is on the line, ask yourself, what will it cost you to speak up? And what might it change if you do? Speech balloon. If this story moved you, comment below. Loudspeakers. Share it with someone who needs a reminder of what quiet leadership looks like. Movie camera. And don't forget to subscribe, because the next story might just change the way you see the world.